at the geography, the economics, and as you pointed out, the government's really deep commitment to advancing the ecosystem. I mean, as you can imagine, one of the biggest headlines that spurred a lot of speculation is President Trump's visit to the UAE and the subsequent deal on selling chips and fueling the UAE data centers. And there's some speculation that that could make UAE number one for data centers within a decade or so. So with that, that's a huge opportunity for platforms, for attracting foreign investment, attracting foreign companies, of stimulating local innovations, local solutions, attracting foreign workers. That represents a massive, massive opportunity that the government is leaning into. And that's just one sector, but it's one that folks are really looking at right now.
And probably Kia can also see that the whole country runs on innovation. So you have to be an entrepreneur even at your job. So there's definitely like an innovation spillover.
I'm Alicia with Seraph. Seraph has two parts as an organization. So we have software that is deal flow and portfolio management software for venture investors, angel groups, family offices, so people who want to track their investments. And we also have the Seraph Compass, which is what this webinar is through. So we do weekly education on venture capital and angel investing. We also have a whole educational hub. You've got articles, templates, ebooks, all of our historical webinars and interviews, everything kind of surrounding venture is in there. There's a lot that you will be able to find. Most of it is not, we don't really cover what I would call trends. So you won't find like, the top 5 trends in AI or anything like that in there. You'll find very structural educational stuff. So how do safes work, right? How does a cap table work, right? Things like that are very structural, not really rising and falling with the times, more so structured to angel investing. So that's the Seraph Compass. The webinars that we do are a little bit more topical in that we cover concepts and topics that we may not find in the written format of what we're doing. So that's what this webinar is through. I think it's great to be a little less ignorant every day. And that's why I run these personally, right? Is because I am just interested in learning and I'm curious. And so I think other people may be too. Now, before I introduce our panelists, let's do a little bit of background information on the UAE. So it's hard to find this first box here in startups and growth. I try to do a count of startups on any country that we are featuring. I put thousands of startups here because I could not find a solid number for the UAE. You'll see the bottom line there, 5,600 new startups in Q2 of 2024. If you just Google it, it'll tell you that there's 5,600 startups in the UAE, and that's not correct. That was 5,600 new ones that registered in that particular quarter of 2024. And so I could not find a solid number of how many total there are currently, but I know it's over 5,600 and somewhere in the many thousands. You've got 11 unicorns that are based in the country. The top ecosystems by, I suppose, emirate, but city is kind of what I would say, is Abu Dhabi is number 1, Dubai is number 2, and Sharjah, I don't know if I'm saying that right, so you can correct me, but it would be number 3 by, at least from the data that I found. Hub 71 is worth mentioning here just because that was a government initiative and they seem to be doing, I watched a podcast with one of the managing partners there and they seem to be doing some really interesting ecosystem building in the city of Abu Dhabi. The key industries that we've gotten, we'll talk about this during the webinar, but at least what I could find from data, fintech seems to be the biggest driver here. You got e-commerce, health tech, sustainable energy, AI, and advanced technologies. And a lot of this, fintech is the one that stood out to me as far as like the things that I read, but a lot of these are just whatever is core to venture investing in startups now kind of is reflected in this ecosystem. So I don't see anything particularly outstanding in terms of industries related to the country. And then key economic drivers related to what's driving startups. So the oil and gas has got to be the first one, just because that's where a lot of the economic revenue comes from. And that makes sense to, I'm sure, everyone on the call. Tourism is actually really big, especially in Dubai. I have not actually personally been there, but it's top of my list for places to go. Government initiatives, and that's related to Hub 71. So I think the government is doing a lot to push startups and innovation in the country. And then the business-friendly environment. So that's also something that's worth mentioning, is that Dubai in particular is a really great place for businesses from everything that I have seen. the country is very, very friendly to businesses in a way that other places may not necessarily be. And so as an American, I can say that. But so that's our quick overview here. And let's now shuffle over to our panelists. And I think I'll stop sharing so we can do intros, and then I've got to switch my view to speaker view. So wonderful. Ladies first, we have Miss Kia Davis with us, and I'll have you guys actually do your full intro. But Kia is a startup ecosystem builder and author. She lived in Dubai for 8 years, and so got great exposure. And this was a few years ago, Kia. So I'll have you go into what you saw while you were there on the ground. But I think you've got a wonderful perspective on the growth of the ecosystem. And Rajay, say your name for me one more time, because you just said how to say it and then I forgot.
No worries. So my name is Rajai.
Rajai, that's what it is. Rajai,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
And Rajai is an investment professional at Zidane Capital, which is one of the front-running venture capital firms. But also, I note that you guys have a lot of different pieces of investing that you do, and there's horse racing and polo and really cool stuff past that.
Exactly.
And you also run the Straight Up Startup podcast, which is a podcast for entrepreneurs and startups in the MENA region. So, Kim, just ladies first, I'll have you introduce yourself and your background, and then we will go to you.
Fantastic.
Great. So, hi everyone, welcome. Great to see you. Excited to dig in. Yeah, Kia Davis, my background is primarily as a strategist, but within that, focused a lot on building ventures, particularly growing them, getting them from the we've gotten started, now it's time to grow stage. Also doing a lot of advising to investors, whether it be VC, private equity, search fund, which is a subset of private equity, and then also on their portfolio companies, but also big tech and governments on what ecosystems look like. So I'm an ecosystem person. I love kind of how ecosystems come together. And yeah, that's exactly right, Alicia. I was in Dubai. What a lot of folks were saying was the beginning. So it started in 2010, and I was there within a few years of that. And the reason it started within 2010 was there was one celebration of entrepreneurship conference that was the first time that it happened, and it was like, we have this stake in the ground. This was the first time that we're doing a lot of this. And after that, you really started to see the investment. There had always been startups, but there wasn't really an ecosystem that was really well networked, well documented. There wasn't much in the way of VC. There was a lot of kind of angel. So a lot of things really started happening after that point. And we'll get into this, but the UAE is such a fascinating and unusual region because, of course, it does have quite a lot of money, but the country itself is really only about half a century old. So some of those rails are still being put in place for the first time, which makes it very exciting. Oh yeah, and I'm the author of Flashpoint 100, Radical Business Growth in 100 Days, which is for small business and venture owners who want to grow their business really quickly.
Amazing, thank you. And Rajai,
please go. Fantastic. Well, I hope I can match Kia's energy. Phenomenal. So yeah, my name is Rajai Sahwi. So as you mentioned, I'm an investment professional at Zidane Capital, which is a private investment company. As you mentioned, we work through multiple investment areas. Specifically, also we have a venture capital, like a heavy venture capital investments. So, and also my podcast. So my podcast called The Straight Up Startup. It's a play on words to kind of get your startup straight up. And this is a kind of an homage for the region, because there's a big movement for startups and venture capital, specifically for youth, which is part of my focus, because we have a huge youth unemployment ratio, especially in the Levant, which is a source of entrepreneurs and startups to the GCC, and obviously beyond. So yeah, the podcast focuses on venture capital, policies, and entrepreneurship in the MENA region. And fun fact, the podcast the idea of the podcast started when I worked at the Mohammed bin Rashid Innovation Fund, or MBRIF, in Dubai. I worked there for a year under Ernest and Young. Yeah, this was how I was exposed to the entrepreneurship ecosystem.
Amazing. Thank you. And I was listening to some of it, and it's funny because some of it I can understand and some of it I can't. You guys like very easily swap between languages. And so, but exactly. I think it's genuinely worth listening to. And if you have any episodes that are only in English, you should certainly mark those, because I would listen to all of it.
I would definitely send you some. Definitely. I'd mark those.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And so to start us out here, let's talk about the UAE as a venture hub. So what have you guys seen that's making it more attractive? Like, I think there's been a very specific and intentional government ecosystem push. What have you guys seen, Kia, over your time there, and even before that and to now? What have you guys seen that's like actual initiatives? What's making it attractive as a hub? What kind of things are you seeing in place that may be different from other ecosystems? Because here we have, in the States, we've got, I think we have startup hubs that are not necessarily, they weren't forced to be startup hubs. Like, there's not necessarily things kind of centered around Silicon Valley. And then you have New York, and you have a couple other places. And then you have some middle of the country type cities that governments are trying to push it forward, and it's not really working that well. But it depends on the city. But what have you guys seen on the ground, and what's making it attractive to start a startup there? Yeah, I'll have you go first.
Great. My philosophy is that every startup ecosystem is really quite unique. We often talk about the Silicon Valley in this place and in this place, but in reality, there's one Silicon Valley, and it came about because of very specific reasons. However, what that means is that what you see in places like the UAE is that there are some really specific elements that make it quite an interesting place to invest. So, for example, because of whether it be family money, oil money, proximity to the government, there are quite a few folks who are, let's say, high net worth individuals, or maybe they're funds that are really, led or controlled by high net worth individuals, or folks with access to family money that have quite a lot of freedom. So what that, and, Rajay, you can probably speak to this a bit more than me, but, a typical VC fund will have the general partners that make the investment decisions and the limited partners that are investing in that. And there's maybe a discussion every 10 years or so on raising another fund, et cetera. And, if you think about maybe a family structure, a family office structure, or if you think about just, an angel or high net worth individual, they can really do what they want. They can really, they don't have, they're not beholden to an investment thesis that they set 10 years prior. So in some ways, what that means is that the ecosystem can move quite quickly because folks can get in there and make those decisions. On the other hand, it is still a newer ecosystem compared to, say, Silicon Valley. And so what I think is often the case is you get this funny combination of a lot of like money going into, it could be early stage, it could be speculative, it could be high tech, it could be, really like new things that are very exciting. And also money going into things that are really, really safe, proven business models, but kind of almost this like funny polarization. And so some founders kind of say, hey, it's kind of weirdly easy to get startup funding, and it might be fairly easy to get like bridge funding or, mezzanine, but not that easy to kind of get the funding in between that's maybe a little less exciting. So you see these kind of like funny pockets where things might be a bit uneven or even easier in some places than others. But yeah, the geography, the economics, and as you pointed out, the government's really deep commitment to advancing the ecosystem. I mean, as you can imagine, one of the biggest headlines that spurred a lot of speculation is President Trump's visit to the UAE and the subsequent deal on selling chips and fueling the UAE data centers. And there's some speculation that that could make UAE number one for data centers within a decade or so. So with that, that's a huge opportunity for platforms, for attracting foreign investment, attracting foreign companies, of stimulating local local innovations, local solutions, attracting foreign workers, that represents a massive, massive opportunity that the government is leaning into. And that's just one sector, but it's one that folks are really looking at right now.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Absolutely.
That
Okay.
yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of top it up with what Kia has mentioned, so it is worth mentioning that the UAE itself operates as a startup in itself as a country. They have been always forward thinking with their innovation and their mindset towards technology. No government in the region, probably in the world even, has, or like few models in the world have done that and succeeded in that short amount of time. And so this is kind of from the government part. I can tell you this because I worked on the Jordan economic modernization vision for Jordan, especially in the tech sector. And we were taking the UAE as a model of how to be innovative as a government and provide that infrastructure and attracting foreign capital into the country and the whole region. So this is why UAE has been like a lighthouse for other governments and ministries all over the world on how to operate as a startup and provide that infrastructure that we see now. The other thing is that it is very cosmopolitan, which could be like a founder magnet, which I have personally witnessed. So when I worked for the Mohammed bin Rashid Innovation Fund, it was a it was an accelerator for global startups across 18 sectors. 18, which is a phenomenal number. That was back in 2018. So to have technologies like defense, aerospace, fintech, health tech, pharma, you've had literally like 18 sectors that we've been looking at from all over the world, coming in and help them try to set up shop in the UAE. So we had them not just in Dubai, but the UAE in general. So it started very early on, which was very prudent, and now it's as we can see, it's a global hub, and almost all nationalities live there, and all of them have certain ambitions, and they have room for their ambitions, which is very comparable to New York or the Valley or other major cities. Yeah, so this also has attracted capital, not just from the country, but also like foreign capital. So even like as we saw in 2022, 2023, when the VC investment have been slowing down due to COVID and after the hyperinflation, UAE kept going. They poured around 1.3 billion dollars in VC money. So yeah, this is what makes it generally attractive as a country, and how is it a model to other places.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Second that and say it's really funny. That's exactly the language that I've used over the years. People are like, really Dubai, really? Why, why Dubai? What's it? And I say,
Exactly.
it's because it feels like if a country were a startup, it would be the UAE.
Literally.
And
Yeah.
You feel it. If the government wants to do something, they do it. There isn't really the bureaucracy. If it doesn't work out, you'll see a pivot, you'll see a change in direction, you'll see new announcements. There'll be like surprises, there'll be things that are seemingly built, overnight. Things can move really quickly and with really minimal bureaucracy. And not everything is, not everything works out, but you can kind of see that change pretty quickly as well. So yeah, it's very much like a startup. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a very deep contrast to how most governments that I'm familiar with, especially the one here, is operating, in that there's no iteration, there's no, you could say that there's forward thinking, but not really, right? Like it's not, it's very, very different. And I also think what the UAE has done in terms of it treats it has its own brand at this point. Like it has, especially Dubai, has its own city brand. And that is something that some cities develop that naturally, just because it happens, right? Like by people visit and then tourists spread the word and whatever. But like Dubai seems to have done this intentionally, which I think is amazing in a way that's turned out very positively for the region. So thank you for all that background. Let's talk a little bit about industries of focus, because fintech came up a lot in what I was seeing. Are there any that you find have a particularly strong footing in the UAE right now? Rajai, I think I'll point this one to you. Are there any besides fintech, or any that are worth mentioning, or that I know one of the podcasts I was watching mentioned like medical device tech, because the regulations are becoming more friendly, and they have a two-way, going back to how the government is operating the startup, they have a two-way flow with the regulation agencies. So they're more agile than what you would find here, or in Europe, even for that matter. So what are you seeing?
Absolutely. So as I told you, it attracts so many industries, and I don't want to just focus on startup, because startups feed on a bigger economy. You have to have the SMEs, you have to have the large corporation, you have to have the education and institutions, and you have to have the global access, which the UAE has as an infrastructure. As I told you, because it acts as because it's a startup itself, and as Kia said, it's very agile. You have very minimal bureaucracy. You don't feel like a stranger. So it doesn't just attract tech founders; it attracts also businesses that consumes those tech, which is also necessary in any economy. You have to have both to have that balance. So we have a lot of examples from the Levant and from Europe, and some of them from Asia, and the US and Africa, most notably, moving to the UAE because of so many reasons. Either for regulatory purposes, for the tax-free zones, for the ease of getting the labor, and for ease of also like getting the golden visa, which makes you easily a resident. So those are incentives on so many levels, not just on a tech level, but on a broader economic level. Which also brings me to the multiple industries. So we have so in the UAE they have a lot of industries. Like I can't even think of an industry that they don't have a proven model of or a president of. Every time I go to Dubai or Abu Dhabi, there's some conference going on about a certain sector, which proves to you that they appreciate the importance of PPP, or public-private partnership, because the government is agile, is giving space to work with the private sector. That's why you see like the minimal bureaucracy, because there's constant work going on together, which has this domino effect of bringing in other industries that are vertical or horizontal, which is super crucial for an economy to grow. And this is what we've been seeing throughout the years.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thank you. Kid, when you were there, when the ecosystem was kind of just getting started, was there any industry driver at the time, or was it just kind of, you're nodding your head, so I'll let you talk about that.
Yes, and I would say there were industry drivers, and there was also, let's call it, business models or types of things in the early days that you saw. And I just posted about this on LinkedIn. So consumer tech was kind of the name of the game very early on, because it's hard to sell to enterprises when you're that early, right? When very little is proven. So it was a lot of consumer tech. And then in terms of the business models, what we really saw in the first, let's say, 5 years were like either quite close clones of scale-ups in other markets, particularly the US, so companies that were doing well, or you saw localized versions of that concept. So, and unsurprisingly, those were the first like really big transactions. So Talabat was one of the first big acquisitions, and that was food delivery. So they were first and that was in 2016. They were first to the UAE. Well, to the region, but they were it was certainly not a new concept globally. There was Souk.com that was the next largest one. I think it was about 600 million acquisition price by Amazon, and it was an online marketplace. And that was, that was very exciting. At the time, also what we were seeing was a lot of online like apparel e-commerce, particularly high end. So I think most of you on this webinar will already know that there are quite a few people who are affluent. They might not fit the definition of high net worth individuals, but they might be affluent. And on top of that, Dubai is, well, the UAE as a whole, and Dubai in particular, is a destination for folks to come and shop. And that has meant some really exciting e-commerce startups around, it could be luxury goods, it could be high-end apparel, it could be just apparel, it could be, previously owned designer apparel. You saw a lot of these things come out, I would say, kind of within the first 5 years. And again, most of them had a very similar business model to what you saw in Europe, to what you saw in, in the US that was doing well. And I honestly believe that was actually important. It did make for some kind of boring pitch competitions early on, because it was like, wow,
Yeah.
this sounds like Uber, and wow, this sounds like, but it was really important because effectively the ecosystem needed to train investors on what to look for and to provide things that felt safe to them. And if they could point to the success of something in the US and say, all right, well, this is the same, and I understand, how it might thrive here, then it was it was just a safer place for them to put money in rather than some truly innovative startup in an ecosystem that was super new. Those early founders found things just really, really tough, really, really, really tough. So I would say, yeah, consumer tech was a really big one. And then later, property. Dubai is a huge property market. So you had a lot of folks with deep, deep, deep expertise in real estate who were developing real estate startups, either, kind of Zillow type things, or it could be services, rental listings, all sorts of things. Finance, as you've mentioned, yeah, e-commerce, luxury. I would say those were some of the early big ones.
Yeah.
Oh, health tech. Health was always difficult though, because of course it's regulated, right? So, for example, I have a friend who is starting something in health. She had to work with them to change the law to allow it. So health was a big one, but again, tough because it's regulated. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, you're absolutely right. And I just wanted to add to that, like the Arabization, which has been looked down upon so many times. But like back then, it did do some great exits, like Careem. Careem exited for $3.1 billion, which is insane. Utopian startups like a Pure Harvest, they raised around $700 million, which is close to $1 billion. So we do have, they do have a lot of great models that people have and founders have exited from. They also have this kind of a connotation for just like the pay, the PayPal mafia. You have now the Careem mafia in Dubai, who have also started multiple startups, and now they're also growing that. So you have literally its own ecosystem. And back then when Kia was there, it's been thriving. It was like it was so ripe for innovation that whoever was there and and exited was, it was just like a golden ticket. That's why you see everyone so affluent. By the way, like no, everyone is a high net worth individual in Dubai. So yeah.
Very true.
That's funny. And see, I did not know that, and that's really great to know about the ecosystem and how it's developed and the history there. That's so interesting to me. What do you guys think investors? So if people are considering investing from outside the region into the region, what should investors be thinking about? Because I think we understand a little bit of why it's attractive for startups to set up shop there. What about it, besides what we've already talked about, is important for investors to know? Culturally, I imagine there are some differences when you're looking at investing capital into startups or with other investors in the region. So if I'm American, which I am, and I wanted to invest with a venture group in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi, right? What would I need to think about before doing that? Can you guys talk a little bit and try to educate our audience about the cultural nuances there?
Yeah.
Yeah, Roger, why don't you start?
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, as we said, like this, it's the landscape there. It is very attractive, and I'm gonna go more deeper. Obviously, A is the time zone. I know this sounds very like it has a minimal effect, but it actually doesn't, because you have like when the market closes in the noon in Dubai, in Asia, it like closes more in the evening in like Europe and America. So you have this like centralized thing place where you are almost connected everywhere in the world with the time zone. So you won't have an issue regarding that. And there's a lot of trust because you have very few. I mean, I haven't heard of people who have trespassed the laws. It is heavy regulated. It is as we said, it is not bureaucratic. It's like it has very minimal bureaucracy, but it's also like regulated. So you don't there's a lot of protection from the government. There's a lot of heavy reporting and heavy monitoring, which also helps to gain the trust of the founders, and they do have the precedence for that, and it's very the city itself is very founder focused. So it's very rare for a city or a country where you have youth and people who are 24/7 thinking about the next big thing, or work in even the people who work in corporate jobs. They do operate side businesses that they eventually leave and grow and become bigger and bigger startups. And this is very generally attractive for foreign investors to come and set up shop in the UAE.
Yeah, I would second that. I would also say, as an investor, as much as we talk about the amount of money being there, it is also quite common for startups to really be quite honest about when and where they need to move, or when and where they need to raise outside the UAE. So there's a startup that's still around, but it's pivoted, Fetcher, and they raised about $90 million. They're UAE based, but raised $90 million from Silicon Valley for their Series B, I believe, round. Maybe it was Series C. And it's not uncommon for startups to do that kind of Series B and onwards round outside of the UAE. And they might need to relocate. There have been a number of startups that have gone through Y Combinator, a number of them that's the big incubator, the very famous one in California, and a number of them stayed in the US, for example, because it made sense for their business. So, and that's actually, I think, a really positive sign for potential investors, because when you invest in the region, your money is not confined to the region and to what the region has to offer. Founders are quite open to going to where they need to be, whether it's for the customers or whether it's for the follow-on funding. So you do see that a lot. It depends on what they do and what their needs are. So it's something to keep in mind, that the opportunities for founders are much bigger than what the population size might suggest.
Is there constraint on exit opportunity for that reason? I know I asked this because the other couple countries that we've covered, I think, are a little bit less developed than what the UAE is. And so therefore, when you invest capital, the timeline to exit anywhere right now is really long. And given it's already long, is it even longer still in UAE? And are a lot of those exits via M&A? I imagine, there's not that many unicorns at this point. And so therefore, like, what does the exit path look like for most founders that are entering the market or deciding to raise and base there?
So lot of, there's the full gamut, everything from IPO to obviously shut down if, if things aren't working well. It's not so. I mean, this is years and years ago, but Fadi Gondor, who's kind of was like the
Yeah,
unofficial godfather of the ecosystem.
very true.
His company Aramex was effectively like a localized FedEx, and when he listed it in the U.S. and he was the first Arab person to list a company on, or foreign one anyway, to list on the Nasdaq. At this point, I mean, the Abu Dhabi's ADX, their stock market, Talabat, the same startup that was privately purchased in 2016, the food delivery one, did an IPO last November. There's an ed tech start, and that one was about the 2 billion was raised through that. There was an ed tech startup that raised about 600 million kind of late last year. Both of those were, I believe, like late last year or within the last year. So IPO is an option. A local IPO, I should say, is an option. A number of startups, if you're building any version of a clone or a feature, et cetera, you might be looking at M&A. And again, the region has really seen, or more specifically, the UAE has really seen some success there. I mean, Amazon has come and bought, as Rajaya mentioned, Kareem was bought by Uber for 3.1 billion. So that the really big ticket M&A is absolutely a possibility. I would say it's probably just about, it's a really kind of boring answer, but the right team will make the right decision. They'll understand where they need to go. They'll understand
Yeah.
who to partner with and how to sort of court those conversations early on and manage their cash. So I don't think there are massive limits. It may not be as easy as if if you are sitting in New York City and you're a train ride away from the New York Stock Exchange, that path to IPO might look a little different. But I don't think that there are opportunities that are fundamentally cut off from startups. I really don't.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned Fadi because this was one of the biggest and one of the early models that a startup from the Levant, it's a Jordanian, our mix is Jordanian, that moved to the UAE and it IPO'd and exited. And then they created WAMDA, which is their VC family office. And, an R&D center back then that was gathering a lot of data about the VC ecosystem and the who's who. So, yeah, as just to second that with Kia is that there are, it's just fascinating that you can work on a startup from literally an idea, like just like ink on paper up until an exit and an IPO. You have all the options and you have proven models that some startups have been there, done that. Even the law firms or the consulting companies have also been there, done that. So you have the whole ecosystem supporting you. It's very interesting. Like it's kind of a clear ladder where you can do it your own way. And that's why, again, it's very founder led because the founders have so many options that they don't have to hustle and bustle and fight over. They can just be problem focused, get as many earnings as possible, prove your concept, make it as bigger as possible. We have everything for you, and you can just expand it from there.
Thank you both. Final question before we move to Q&A. So if anyone has questions, I've got 2 in the Q&A right now, so we'll get to those. But if anyone has more questions, you can feel free to drop them. The final question for you guys. So from a founder's perspective, if I was courting investment in the UAE, what are important things to think about besides the general? So, and I mean, probably more so culturally and relationship wise, because like here in the States, if I'm trying to get an investor on the East Coast, I need a lot more traction than I need for investors on the West Coast. Like just by virtue of how these venture investors operate, they're all in venture, but early stage, like pre-seed means different things to different people, depending where you are in the US. If we were looking in the UAE, what would be the specific things that founders should come prepared with? How should they approach? Do they need more intros? Like, how does the ecosystem, the relationships work? Rajay, I'll start with you.
Sure, absolutely. So one thing to kind of debunk it is, a lot of people, a lot of investors, and a lot of startups, when they go there, they think it is US style. It is not US style. It is mostly relationships. So you have to invest heavy in your relationships and with a proven track record. So it's nice to see that it's very relationship centric, which is very Arab, and to have that warmth and to kind of see the founders 1, 2, and 3 and 4 times. And this is kind of the synergy assessment there. So it's and this is why we have a lot of success. Like most people think like you could just focus traction, but also if you think for an early stage startups, founders are very important part. It's actually the most important part of the startup and the team. So if you can build rapport with the founders really well, if one startup fails, the same founders can build more and build more, which we have seen so many cases. A lot of startups, one of them, team have also pivoted. So we have a lot of startups who have started with something and then pivoted just because they have a very solid founders. So it is nice to have that relationship element where you have a conviction in the founder and the team itself. There's also another kind of, I'm going about it of kind of a myth debunked, that it is not just oil money, as most people think. It is a very diverse economy with like a real infrastructure and technology platforms. I don't have the numbers of how much of their GDP is non-oil, but there's a lot of tourism, there's a lot of other revenue generating sources other than oil. So not everything you see is oil money. And simply put, it's a small geography with a global ambition, and they've already proved it, and they continue to do so.
I completely agree. The relationships are so important. And I think even the relationship building looks a little different than if you're coming in the US. In the US, if you're trying to reach this, VC, you contact their portfolio company and you kind of get them on side, and then they make the intro to the. Yeah, and in the UAE, it's not that simple. You can do that, but one of the things that's fascinating is this idea of influence. There's even an Arabic word that people talk about, wasta, right? So like connection.
Yeah.
And it may not be at all obvious who that is. So there can be somebody who's running a venture capital fund, or maybe they're the CEO of a major like media company. They might be Western, and on paper they look super, super impressive. They really might not have nearly as much wasta as a mid-level government like bureaucrat. And you would never know because they might be like very modest in how they dress or act or whatever. So really kind of understanding what those power dynamics are and where they are and who's listening to who. It does take a little bit of time, but it's important to, for things like, for example, to keep a good reputation, keep an open mind. If you're not of the culture, this is like the Emirati culture, the local culture, which Emiratis are, less than 20% of the UAE, but hugely, hugely important. Be curious, learn some Arabic, right? Understand how the religion works. Understand. So there's things that are important, like Ramadan. No one, businesses are still open, but no one does any new deals. So if you arrive the day before Ramadan and you're trying to fundraise, just sit back and relax for a month. Like exactly. It's not going to happen. So understanding, how the country works, how the people work, what they really value, what they really appreciate, getting to understand the culture and understanding how relationship building works. And, I think as Westerners, we have a tendency to be a little transactional. This is what I want. This is what I can do for you. This is what I want. And I would never say that money is not important there, but what I found is how people how people consider money and how they move with money.
Yeah.
Lead with the money conversation is really not going to get you very far very fast.
Very true.
It just isn't. So yeah, you'll get there, and of course it's important and people realize that, but showing up and saying, I'm looking to raise $100,000 and I heard you have a lot of money, you're just, people will be very polite, but it's just not really going to get you very far at all. So just understanding some of those things, and certainly if anyone is looking to come there, spend time. It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place. It's so easy to live. People are great. It's so cosmopolitan. So, flying in, twice a month is, you can do it, but you're going to get so much out of it in so many more different ways if you just plan to really spend time there and get to know the place and get to know the people and build relationships that way.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and shift over to our Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'll take a couple of these. Mr. Barry had a question for Rajai. I see you have a strong connection with Jordan. How do you see the connection between Jordan and the UAE? There are a lot of educated people in Jordan. Would that be a good place to run R&D serving UAE commercial base?
Absolutely. Thank you, Barry, for the question. So not just Jordan, generally the Levant region, and maybe I'm going to talk specifically about Jordan because I'm based here. For example, we have, for youth aged between 18 and 30, the unemployment rate is 47.8%. That's close to 50%. So innovation entrepreneurship is a necessity as opposed to a way for wealth creation. We have to create more businesses. You have to utilize your education to innovate. So there's this constant mindset of R&D. For males, I can definitely say so for females. We have, like, Jordanian women are one of the top 3 most educated women in tertiary education. So we're talking universities with like masters and PhDs and so on and so forth. So those are the ones who are, that's why there's a constant R&D, and those are the ones who become founders that are problem specific and sector specific. So the Jordanian market is quite small. They can be here and have the kitchen here, or maybe Lebanon, Iraq, so on and so forth, and then expand to new markets in the GCC, or having the company registered in the UAE, and the founders are basically there fundraising and doing their operations. So it's more of a supply and demand, and obviously for the many reasons of cultural relevance and similarity in the languages. We have a lot in common, so it's very typical, especially what I see from my podcast guests, that they have a VC in the UAE, or they're founder in the UAE and Saudi, etc. So there is a lot of that model here, or like in the Levant generally.
Okay, thank you. Next question here. This will be for both of you. Can you comment on the funding and startup support for founders from other backgrounds outside of the UAE and female founders? So maybe Kia, please.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, it's different in different Emirates, but Dubai is 90% foreign, 85, 90% foreign. So when we talk about founders, we're not referring to only the Emirati or the local, citizen founders. They're in the mix for sure, and they're doing things. And funny enough, there are quite a few government programs that are designed to really stimulate, entrepreneurship and startups by citizens. But the vast majority of things are going to folks who are non-citizens, the vast, vast, vast majority. And that's been the case ever since the UAE was the UAE, just because it's always been effectively a melting pot. It's always attracted folks from all over the region and all over the world. Female founders, I was just looking at some data, and unfortunately I don't have it to hand. I can find it. Female founders have not, in the last year, I want to say it's in the region of 7%, but I can look that up and get back to you, that got funding. So there is an issue there. I will say it's odd because when I've done a lot of work in UAE universities, and when you do that, when you see the university startups, when you see the mechanical engineering, the computer engineers, vast majority are women. Vast majority are women. So there does seem to be some kind of disconnect there around the fully fledged startups that are at the funding stage and what you see at the university level. Because what it looks like in the US is, there's a gap at the university level, and then that kind of, just continues to grow, whereas you don't see that gap at the university level. So there does seem to be an issue there. I can't comment on what's driving it, but I think it's certainly not that there's a belief that women, don't belong in STEM. I can tell you that much. I can tell you that much. That's not it.
That's interesting, and that's news to me, because when I look at it in the US, all female teams get around 2% of venture funding. And a lot of people take issue with that, but I also, pipeline thing is genuinely real, like in that a lot of the tech startups that are being founded are, they're really highly advanced tech, and a lot of women don't go into STEM. Like there's still something there, but not as much as most people try to make it seem. So it's interesting that there are a lot of women in the heavy technical sciences in the UAE.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, I did not know.
Across the STEM fields. It's quite fascinating. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Rajai, I would love your perspective too.
Absolutely. No, not at all. I'm enjoying this. Akia mentioned everything that's necessary, but I also want to highlight that there's a lot of Emirati women founders too, which has been previously overlooked. So although they're 20%, they're quite a minority in their country, but they are also entrepreneurs and innovators, especially in tech, and they're very well educated and they're very focused. So there's also support, which is nice. It feels like home for everyone. Like there's the support is there for the locals and for the internationals, which is very nice to see.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next question here. Let's go back to the top. So Mr. Berry has a second question. So I think from one of your comments before, when you said that a lot of people have side jobs, he says that it doesn't sound like there would be a lot of employee loyalty in that case, if there's a lot of people always looking to do their own thing. So I would actually broaden the question too, to understand a little bit more about what employee turnover looks like in the region. Like culturally, I know, here in the States, if you've got somebody for 3 years and you're pretty happy if they leave, that's just standard process at this point. What does that look like for startups in the UAE?
Yeah, I can definitely jump on that. So it does seem like there is unloyalty, but actually it does foster a lot of innovation, because there's not also, entrepreneurship is a mindset. That's what I was trying to convey, and probably Kia can also see that the whole country runs on innovation. So you have to be an entrepreneur even at your job. So there's definitely like an innovation spillover for the company and beyond. Obviously, I was a 9-to-5 employee. I worked in consulting for the longest time. But I was I was doing the podcast, which led me to investments and financing, which also like very related. So there's like personal growth that is consistent. Most corporates there, the corporates there, even the international ones, have constant engagements with the startups. We used to do a lot of pro bono work for the NGOs and the startups, doing them their financial models, their business plan, their strategy. So I'm just trying to convey that there's a mindset around it, and it is very well connected. Like whatever you do at your job, you can do also elsewhere, and kind of have that generating income. I can't talk about case by case, but I've definitely seen previous colleagues who have dropped out, have done their business, have done their startup, exited, went back to corporate. So it's a very healthy environment where startups are not competing with corporates, but actually trying to solve the problems within the corporate ecosystem and trying to have that mindset always ongoing, which is probably healthy on the long term.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that as well that there are varieties of visas, but for the vast majority of people, again, 90% are not citizens. The vast majority of people, your visa is tied to your job or to you being employed. So that's one reason why people start things on the side. And it's not, in another country, you might be like, oh, I have enough money to quit my job. There, you might need to stay at that job for the visa until you're absolutely sure about your business. And then on the other side, in terms of when you're hiring employees and in terms of loyalty, well, they're tied to you in that same way. Typically, if they've come over and they're on a visa, if they leave with nothing lined up, most of them will have to leave the country. So it's not something where people are switching every 6 months. It's really not. But that is why people start things on the side.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll ask, just so we've got 2 minutes here. So as my final question to you all, if you had to make recommendations for an angel or like an individual person or even a venture fund that wanted to start investing in the region, where would you recommend that they begin? Is that, join an angel syndicate, or is that get to know some people? Is that go spend some time there for 6 months and then like find your way in? What would you recommend as someone who wants to enter from an investment standpoint? And Rajai, I'll have you go.
So I have two simple advice: is A, network, and B, do your due diligence. The UAE is a we've mentioned all the great things, but also there is and in recent years there is the herd mentality, which could be bad for investments. So make sure you do your own DD, stay true to your theses, network, but have that mindset, have that conviction that you have, and whatever is required for you for due diligence. Just keep that in mind. And the other thing that also kind of Kia mentioned, I just want to kind of summarize it in terms of investing in founders and the culture element. They invest in values. The UAE and usually the Arab countries in general, they invest in values. So, if you have your values highlighted, if you respect the values, things will go very smoothly for you. So yeah, those are my advice in investing in the UAE.
I completely agree. Yeah, spend time there. Go for an extended vacation, build the network, speak to people who are there. They can really guide you. And then in terms of some specific places to go, in terms of information, WAMDA and Magnet are great websites. Magnet is a bit like a pitch book, I guess. It's paid, but they have some good blogs that are, free, but it's a worthwhile investment if you're thinking of being an investor. WAMDA, as Vijay had mentioned, they have a lot of resources and thought leadership and blogs. It's like a news site. It's like a TechCrunch, if you're familiar with that. And then there's a group called Venture Souk. They now do investment management. They started as a massive angel network, and they run an angel training symposium yearly called Angel Rising. And it's about 3,000 people. It's typically in partnership with New York University, Abu Dhabi. That's a really, really great place to go and to meet people, as well as to go to just a lot of conferences like GITEX is a big one. It's a big kind of technology trade show. Sharjah, which is another emirate in the UAE, has a huge entrepreneurship festival. They get really big headliners. I mean, they really get some top folks who are global. So attending one of those big events is a really good idea too, both to network, to get your pulse on things, to see those always have like pitch competitions, see who's there. And then certainly to talk to some service providers about what does it mean to set up your own fund. Some folks have gone with like what's called a holding company because a fund carries very specific regulations. So understanding how to structure, understanding the legal things, but also just understanding what the ecosystem has to offer and how to build relationships is a good idea.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, thank you both. We will call it for today.